So I have the honor, the privilege of introducing our speakers today. They're two of our senior girls, and they have some incredible words of testimony to share with you today. Last week, if you were here, Pastor Anna preached about presence and about the ministry of presence. And I cannot think of better examples of the ministry of presence than these two young women, because their presence in our youth group has impacted their peers and has impacted just the group as a whole. The group culture is the way it is because of their presence, of their gifts, of their witness in our group. So I'm so thankful for them. I'm so proud of them and excited to introduce them to you today. So Daphne Benjamin is going to come first and share with you, and then Maggie Merlot is going to come after. So welcome them now.
All right, good morning. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Daphne. I'm generally pretty quiet and like to hide up in the AV booth, so you may not have seen me before. Pastor Matt reached out to me a couple weeks ago to see if I'd be willing to share my testimony. And I'll be honest, I was pretty nervous. I've never done anything like this before, so bear with me. But the more I thought about it, the more I decided I would like to share mine. I always grew up believing in Jesus. I don't think I ever doubted there was a God. It was just something I knew. My family started going to a Baptist church by my house after my brother and I attended preschool there. I had some great Sunday school teachers throughout my elementary years and genuinely liked going to church. In 6th grade, I moved up to the youth group there. I was one of 3 new 6th graders, and the other 2 already had older brothers in there. Being the new girl was very intimidating. The youth pastor at the time made an effort to get to know me, but a couple months later was called to a different church. After he left, I really struggled to fit in. I would occasionally get a hi or how are you, but that was about it. The new youth pastor never made a point to talk to me, and I honestly don't think he learned my name until I was in 7th or 8th grade. I remember getting butterflies every time I walked into class and sitting alone week after week. Middle school is also when I started running cross country. From day 1 on the team, I proved to have a natural talent for it. I fell in love with it and dedicated so much of my time to running. I practiced 5 days a week and raced on Saturdays. I still went to church every Sunday, but that wasn't my priority. The people there didn't care if I was, so why should I? This is kind of where I would say I strayed from God a little. I still prayed and read my Bible every day, but I never felt super close to Him. Going into my freshman year, I pulled my hamstring and then compensated too much and injured my hip. This led me to being on the sidelines for most of my summer practices and the first couple meets that season. Running was the one thing I was supposed to be good at, so this really messed with me. I didn't enjoy watching my teammates run while I was stuck on the sidelines. I was able to overcome this setback, though, and finish out the season strong, but this would just be the beginning of my gradual decline in running. Around the end of the season, my mom and I decided we wanted to find another church. Neither of us were very happy with where we were, so every Sunday we made a plan to go and try a different church. Eventually, we landed here at FUMC. My mom was raised Methodist, so this was a nice fit for her, plus everyone was so welcoming. My mom reminded me that in Pastor David's sermon, he said, all, in all caps, are welcome, our first time attending. Pastor Anna then recognized us since I go to the same school as her kids and connected us with the youth pastor, Rachel. The Blundies were also very welcoming, and even Pam Grout made a point to sit by us during service. I think from the first time we attended, we knew God was calling us to be here. We started regularly attending a little before Christmas. I know Rachel talked to me a couple times about joining youth group, but I was very reluctant to. I was nervous about joining a new group after my last church, and I was in high school, so being the new girl felt funny. I ended up never trying youth group while Rachel was still here. I don't know if I would have either if Pastor Anna hadn't asked me that summer if I would be willing to help with VBS. I was a little nervous to agree, but she assured me that they could use my help and would be happy to have me. I ended up doing VBS and had a nice time. After that, I decided I would try youth group. I attended youth group for the first time in August of my sophomore year. I remember my mom walked me in, and I awkwardly stood outside the gym for a while. Pastor Anna showed up and said Maggie would be there in a couple minutes if I wanted to walk in with her. I know I've told her this many times, but I don't know if I would have joined youth group if it hadn't been for Maggie. She was so kind that first day and walked me in and let me sit with her during dinner. She included me in her conversations and stayed with me during the game and lesson afterwards. She did this week after week until I made some more friends. This was one of the first times I really saw God working. I realized that he put Maggie in my life for a reason. I may not have had the great experiences I've had with the youth if it hadn't been for her. I know God used her to help me. Two other people who have had a huge part in my joining the youth group were Robin and Brian Hutchinson. From day one of youth group, they made a point to get to know me. I could tell they were very invested in the youth and genuinely wanted to know more about me. They were so supportive and always asked about my running. They even came down to the state cross-country meet that year and made a point to come over and see me after my race. That was another time I realized God had put amazing people in my life. Now I'm not surprised when I run into them at races, and they always bring a smile to my face. In November of that year, I was encouraged to go on the fall retreat. This was definitely a big step for me. I'd never been on any kind of church retreat before, and I was going with a group of people I'd only known for a couple months. I'll never forget the day we left for the retreat because it was my 16th birthday. I was already a little nervous to go, and now I was missing out on celebrating my birthday. However, God was looking out for me. After we'd arrived and unloaded, I was so surprised when Pastor Matt came out with a cake reading, "Happy birthday, Daphne," and then everyone sang to me. I remember being so overwhelmed with their kindness. I felt so special and loved in that moment. The rest of the trip turned out to be a lot of fun. I learned a lot of worship songs, had some good lessons, went on a nature hike with some of the boys, and ended up in a twisted game of Gaga Ball with some of the boys called Head Gaga Ball. You crawled around on all fours and could only use your head to hit the ball. It was wild and honestly kind of dangerous. And I won by default because I stood back and let them get each other out. They then deemed me Head Gaga champion, which honestly felt pretty good. There's silly little memories I have of that trip, but I never had a community of people like that before, one that went out of their way to include me like that. I genuinely felt God's love for me on that trip. COVID, of course, hit in March of my sophomore year, but I made a point to still stay connected with the youth. I went to the Zoom meetings, a virtual Christmas party, and once we started meeting outside again, I went every time I could. Youth group was able to bring me joy in this terrible time. During my junior year, Pastor Matt reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in joining the confirmation class. After thinking it through, I decided this would be a good step in strengthening my faith. I was able to join, and even when I got COVID, they went out of their way to Zoom me into the meetings. I got confirmed in May of last year. It was a very proud moment for me because I now confessed my faith and joined the church. After that, I went on the mission trip that summer. This was also a huge deal for me because, one, I'd never gone on a mission trip before, and two, I'd never even been away from home for that long. I ended up having a great time, though. Being able to help people and seeing how thankful they were made me feel so blessed that God was able to use me in this way. I also felt so close to everyone that went on that trip and had a blast overall. Through all this, I struggled constantly with my running. From low iron problems to a stress fracture, I've dealt with almost everything. These times were different, though. At first, I questioned God about why this kept happening to me. But then I realized that God has a plan for everything. Even though I had to be on the sidelines, I was still able to be with my team and support them. If someone had a rough race or a slight injury, I could sympathize with and encourage them not to give up. God was able to use my misfortunes to help those around me. I'm no longer the exceptional runner I used to be, but because of God, I'm such a better teammate overall. This year, my senior year, was definitely a challenging year for me. I've really struggled with my mental health. Lots of anxiety about the future and just overall feelings of worthlessness and sadness, which led to some self-harm and self-deprecating thoughts. If it hadn't been for my church family, I don't know where I would be. God seemed to be looking out for me every step of the way. I've prayed long and hard about it, and eventually he started to answer me. One Sunday afternoon, I remember laying on my bed. I was feeling terrible about myself and didn't know why. I decided I wouldn't go to youth group that night because I didn't feel like it. But something pulled at me to go. When I arrived, my friend Lily met me with her usual happy-go-lucky energy that immediately put me in a better mood. Then after dinner, the whole group did an activity where we took a note card and wrote down things to do when we were sad. One category was people to talk to, another was Bible verses to read, and the others were things to do or music to listen to. At that moment, I knew why God had called me to church that night. I felt like I was being called out to stop hurting myself and instead fix the problem. I still keep that little note card where I can see it. It's a small reminder of God's work in my life. He's also come through when I was feeling pretty worthless. Val Holland approached me about joining the AV team sometime last year, and her and Molly Eichenberg quickly took me in and taught me what they could. They do so much more than me up there, but just to be able to serve my church makes me feel useful. I love being able to give my time back to the church, and Val's big hugs every Sunday make me feel a million times better. I know God placed Val and Molly in my life for a reason, and through this, I'm able to use one of my God-given gifts. To wrap this up, I've seen God at work in my life in so many ways. I don't know if there was a specific time where I was like, yes, I get it now. Everything just gradually happened over time. And there's so many people I didn't mention who have contributed to my walk in faith, like my grandparents, who brought me my first Bible and encouraged me to read it daily. I try not to take anything for granted now. When something good happens to me, I know it wasn't just a coincidence, and I thank God. I have more hope, too. I'm nowhere near healed, but through God, I know I can get through anything, even the roughest of times. I feel so blessed to be a part of this church and surrounded by so many loving people. If you're ever feeling lost or hopeless, just remember that in the end, God has a plan for you in your life. When Paul says in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, he is saying that whatever comes our way, good or bad, we can make it through with God. And I know this because I have seen God and the church walk with me through all these things. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, everybody. All right, first of all, I want to say a big thank you to everybody in this room. I have been coming to this church for a very long time, so it's safe to say that a lot of you have had a part in shaping me as a person and who I am, and for that I say thank you, and God bless, because I do know that that's not an easy task. For anyone who doesn't know much about me, my name is Maggie Merlot, and yes, I am Anna's daughter. I'm a graduating senior at Connor High School, and I plan to continue my education at the University of Kentucky to study psychology on a pre-social work track. I've been attending FUMC since I was 3 years old. I became an independent member of this church when I was confirmed in 2017, and I've been a familiar face at the FUMC youth group ever since I was an itty-bitty 6th grader. I say this because even though you can look at my life in this church and see me as the girl who is always willing to lend her mom a helping hand, I am still a teenage girl who unfortunately has to experience a lot of teenage girl problems. I could stand here and give you a speech about my entire 7 years at this youth group, but let's be honest, we would be here a lot longer than we'd all like to be. So for the sake of everyone's time and sanity, I will only focus on high school. I believe I can speak for all of my peers when I say that the past 4 years can be correctly labeled as a disaster. Not to point fingers or anything, but COVID and pretty much the entire year of 2020 are to blame. So even things like the pandemic were pretty crappy experiences. They really couldn't have come at a better time. I actually had a lot of reasons to look up at God and say, come on, dude, you can't give me this one favor? Even so, the one thing that kept me from being bitter towards God was my hometown youth group. The FUMC youth group is like no other. The amount of love and support that I have felt from this remarkable group of people is truly unbelievable. And I've known this to be true ever since my freshman year of high school. A lot of people know that my father, Dave Merlot, is a senior master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. About a month before my first day of high school, he was shipped out on a 6-month deployment to a small country in the Middle East. My thoughts exactly were, oh, this is just great. Perfect timing. So as you can see, my freshman year was off to a wonderful start. The day came, we said our goodbyes and sent him off. In short, the whole day was a sob story. A week later, I was set to go on my last middle school mission trip to Camp Lucon in Litchfield, Kentucky. Honestly, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. A week of service with my best friends was the perfect medicine for my current situation. That trip specifically was probably one of my most favorite that I've ever been on with this church. We were able to bless a new group of people each day to do a variety of services, from painting the Lucon dining hall to playing with dogs at an animal shelter. It wasn't a perfect week, though. I still managed to get stung by a bee, hit in the face with a kickball, a pair of broken glasses, and a scar on my eyebrow to show for it. In addition to that, last year's mission trip, I also claimed the title of being the first youth to ever go to the ER on a mission trip. That was a fun time. Despite my tendency to be accident prone, I still had one of the best weeks of my life. It's life-changing to dive headfirst into a community with people that lead a completely different life from your own. It truly is humbling, and it made me realize that the life that I lead here in Northern Kentucky isn't normal across the world. Yes, I wouldn't be seeing my dad face to face for a little while, but there are people in this very state that have it much worse than I do. Sometimes I believe that my experiences outside of youth are what make me appreciate it so much. Everyone on this planet knows that the coronavirus pandemic took the world by surprise in 2020. For the students in the Boone County School District, it was March 13th. And yes, I do still remember the date because it was a very dramatic day. Of course, over the course of quarantine, I was getting less involved with church, and the opportunities of doing so were slim to none. Later into that year, when things started to open back up, I was comfortable with staying at home on Sundays instead of going to youth. Around the same time, I started losing friends, letting my grades slip, and overall not being the best version of myself that I could be. Coincidence? I don't think so. New Year's came around, and at that point, I was sick and tired of feeling like my world had crumbled. I ended up doing a lot of reflecting and came to the conclusion that not only had I gotten lazy with my earthly life, but also in my spiritual life with God. I started out small in fixing this problem by making a simple New Year's resolution. For the entirety of 2021, my goal was to go to every single youth event possible. Regardless of who would be there or how lazy I was feeling that day, I was determined to do everything. As the year went on, I wasn't just a youth member. I also was a part of the praise team and other ministries here at this church. I can proudly say that to this day, my resolution plan has worked, and I have kept it since then. So as you can see, the youth group has helped me a lot through some of my deepest lows. It's also given me some of the best days of my life. Youth has allowed me to see that being close to God is actually really fun. Being his hands and feet is what youth group is all about, and I share my testimony today to encourage other high schoolers and middle schoolers to get as involved as they can, not only in youth, but also in their home church. Thank you.